Have you ever wondered how military forces manage to surround an enemy fort, cutting off their supply lines and communication with the outside world? Let's delve into the concept of military investment. It's a strategic move where armed forces surround an enemy fort or town, effectively cutting off their communication and preventing the introduction of reinforcements and supplies. But it's not just that. There's a term called contravallation. It's a line of fortifications built by the attackers around the besieged fortification facing towards the enemy fort. This serves to protect the besiegers from sorties by the defenders and enhances the blockade. It's like a game of chess, each move carefully planned and executed to ensure the enemy is cut off from their resources and communication. So, the concept of military investment is not just about surrounding an enemy fort, but it's a strategic game of chess aimed at cutting off supplies, reinforcements and communication. Now you may ask, how does this age-old strategy fit into modern warfare? Well, let's delve into it. The basic objectives and tactics of military investment have remained steadfast through the ages, even in the face of drastic technological advances. The goal is always to isolate, cut off and eventually subdue the enemy. Take, for example, the siege of Stalingrad during the Second World War. This was a prime instance of the tactical use of investment. In the early stages of the siege, the Germans were unable to fully encircle the city, allowing the Soviets to ferry in both men and supplies across the Volga River. However, as the battle progressed, the Soviets managed to completely invest Stalingrad, including its airspace. This prevented the Germans from constructing an adequately large air bridge, ultimately leading to their surrender. The starving German forces within the city had no choice but to capitulate. In the modern era, military investment strategies often incorporate intensive shelling, airstrikes, and extensive use of land and sea mines. These tactics serve to further isolate and weaken the enemy, making their position untenable. The goal remains the same, to cut off the enemy and force them into submission, but it's not only about brute force. Investment is a game of patience and strategy, a delicate balance of applying pressure while maintaining one's own defenses. Lines of contravallation and circumvallation, for instance, are essential defensive measures. These consist of earthen ramparts and entrenchments that encircle the besieged city, providing a buffer against enemy retaliation. And then there's blockade running, the daring practice of delivering cargo to a blockaded area. It's a high-risk, high-reward endeavor carried out by the fastest ships or aircraft available. These runners often form vital lifelines, bringing much-needed supplies to those trapped within the blockade. Indeed, with technology's aid, the concept of military investment has adapted to the times, but its core principles remain intact. The goal is, as it has always been, to isolate, weaken and finally overcome the enemy. But is military investment and blockade always legitimate in the eyes of international law? Let's delve into this. International law has clear guidelines when it comes to military investment and blockades. Considered as acts of war, these strategies are not always deemed legitimate. For instance, a blockade which actively prevents a country or region from receiving or sending out food, supplies, weapons or communications is deemed illegal when used against a civilian population. In such cases, it's not just an act of war, but a war crime and potentially a crime against humanity. This distinction is crucial, emphasizing that the targets of these strategies should be military, not civilians. Now, let's talk about blockade running. This is the practice of delivering cargo, often essential supplies like food, to a blockaded area. Historically, this was done by ships known as blockade runners. These vessels were typically the fastest available, often lightly armed and armored, able to slip through naval blockades to deliver their cargo. In our contemporary era, we've seen this practice evolve with the advent of aircraft creating air bridges, such as the one over the Berlin blockade post World War II. Blockade running, while risky, is often a necessary endeavor to provide relief to those trapped in a blockaded area. However, it's worth mentioning that it's not always viewed favorably by those enforcing the blockade, often leading to further conflict. All these practices, military investment, blockades and blockade running, are entrenched in the complexities of war. The strategies of war are not solely about the might of the military, but also involve an intricate dance with international law, humanitarian relief, and the ever-present spectre of ethical considerations. While the strategy of military investment continues to be a crucial part of warfare, it's crucial to remember that it must be exercised within the bounds of international law. As we navigate the tumultuous waters of conflict, it's essential to keep this in mind. After all, the goal should always be the protection and preservation of human life, even amidst the chaos of war.